Hello, everybody, and we come to our next exploration of spiritual meaning. And we start with a haiku, and then we're going to go straight into the meaning for it and see what you think. And of course, with any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your thoughts are just as valuable, but today is really to prove what happens with endings. We're going to explore endings and how we can kind of look at how that impacts upon us, what we can do about it. Anyway, without further ado, let's crack on with this haiku. The author pauses, looks at the book he has made, writes two words, the end. There we are. So just allow for a moment or two those words to just merge with your energy. Think of what that means to you. And this is where I challenge you. It's not just me just rambling away. I think it's nice to have a bit of interactivity. It's trying to build with this lovely community that we've got going here. See what that means to you. And maybe just right now, before we go even any further, just maybe write two words, what that means to you, that one above. You know, looking from a possible spiritual angle or what that means to you. Okay. So when the author pauses, he's got this book, hasn't he? Looking at this book, he paused and thinks, oh, wow, I've actually just written a book. I've written a book. I kind of like put my energy into this beautiful creation that was not there, say a few months ago, whatever. How long it's taken. Some people are prolific writers, they can do it in a week. Others may take a bit longer, maybe take years. Doesn't matter. But that thing of beauty, let me get a book, let's just choose one at random here. Oh, trust me to get Game of Thrones. But here we are. So I'll put that on just just in case there's any copyright issues. So there is that lovely book we've got there. We've got the end in there. At some point, the authors had to go through, put all the work into putting this all together. Not a simple process. And voila, we have one book, one beautiful, like we say, archetype of creation. Isn't that just the best thing ever? That you could do that. And every one of you who's watching this now, you can do that. Now, obviously, there's perceived levels of quality. I'm not going to say you're going to turn into Tolkien with Magical Adventures or Stephen King, but put your own slant, be original. And what comes to me is when I think of achievement and the book, think of the book as merely kind of like a simile or a metaphor, if you like, for how our lives have elapsed. And think now of all the achievements you've had in your life, all those wonderful moments. Think of maybe, getting married, for example, getting a new job, um, sort of like learning to drive, passing all your exams. Think of how much effort's gone into all those little things and start maybe to think of all those little sort of like areas, maybe little booklets, novelettes of your life, how you put that all together. Isn't that just amazing? Isn't it amazing with the think of the things that you've done that maybe you've kind of like sort of like taking yourself away from that because we do get distracted. I mean, I've distracted you right now, bringing you to this YouTube channel, but right now I'm bringing you present, bringing you into that present moment. And think of all the wonderful things you've accomplished, and I'd like you all to give yourself a bit of credit for that because we don't do it, do we? We're forever knocking ourselves back and saying, I should have done this differently. Let's stop that. Let's instead get into that energy of, hey, I did this. I'm pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with myself. It's an achievement. And each day that we start, when you wake up in the morning, the author pauses. The author breathes, doesn't he? He breathes. He gets into that sense of breath and something we all take for granted, obviously. But when we wake up in the morning, when our eyes open for the first time, have a little pause, have a little moment of reflection, and start to think, hmm, how's my day going to pan out today? What little story, what's my book of the day going to be? And I'm not talking literally reading, but your story of the day. There will be much going on. This is where it's so useful to, like, get used to writing a diary or something. I'm not talking about chapter and verse, but it could be quite mundane or perceivingly mundane. Like, for example, woke up, um, made breakfast. It's so we just simple things we take for granted. But when we kind of like get down and understand that we're taking the breakfast, we're filling ourselves with nutrients and bringing that energy into our body, it's actually quite, that's a little complete, tiny little story, little microcosmic story right there. And maybe as you go along, you think, oh, where can I jazz my breakfast up a little bit today? Put a few sprinkles on lemon zest or something on top of your cornflakes or whatever. It's fun little things we can do to just change the narrative a little bit. And that's maybe a thing for us all to think about is how, the narrative of our lives, how we can adapt, how we can change that. And it really does bring us into that present moment and think of your plans for the day as you're watching this now. What are your plans for later in the evening or in the morning, whenever you're watching this? What plans have you got? What is your story of the day? And if it's mundane, jazz it up a little bit. Put some pizzazz into those moments. It's say for example, you always walk the same way to work, for example. Go a different route. You change things up a little bit. And it's like understanding that even as we create our day, every moment there's a completion, there's a cycle of completion. Sit in those spaces because it's amazing when you think about it. Looks at the book he has made. So let's go back to our little friendly author there and his second line of that haiku. When we look at the book he has made, and so again, I've put it down here. It's when he looks at this book and he can go through all those fancy pages, all of the efforts that have gone into them. Like I say, I'm not going to open this because I don't want to be breaking any copyright rules. And sort of like looking at each page on how his life has transpired, what's happened in that moment, or of the protagonist's story, what's happened to that protagonist, how have they even got to that role of being in the protagonist, and the trials and tribulations they have encountered upon their journey. And it's like, you're looking at that book, understanding all those subtle nuances, and then we come back to you, how that reflects upon you. Remember, this story that's called, in my case, Gary, I can look back on my life and thinking like, what's led me to get here today, to this point of time? Who have I met? Where have I traveled to? What road have I gone down? What are my accomplishments and all these sort of things? We could start to sort of like analyze that and like, what's led me into this little book that I'm writing now, where I'm talking to you on YouTube. How did that happen? It's like all these little things we can explore and examine in minute detail or, just a general overview. It's up to us, isn't it, at the end of the day? And when you really kind of like knuckle down into that, it's a lovely like chipping away, unearthing a beautiful story. You are a beautiful story, but it's down to you to kind of appreciate that and understanding those moments. You are an unfolding story. Life is an unfolding story. And when we look into our lives, into those beautiful moments that we share, and maybe even those not so nice moments as well, because it can't all be lovely, lovely, happy energy at times. Sometimes sadness will come, and just reflecting in those moments and thinking like, okay, life can be a challenge, but ultimately it's part of my story, part of my narrative. And I realise what those moments give to me is just like your character in that fictional novel, for example. They develop that character, don't they? They make that character grow. So imagine if you was writing a major biopic of a fantasy figure. This Imagine that we're starting at let's use Lord of the Rings. When we look at Frodo at the start, he's this happy-go little hobbit who's had all these like, not a care in the world. come the end of the book, he's weather worn. He's like, had big battles. He's a big sad ending that he's got to go through. But for all of that, you get this incredible tapestry of adventure that's happened to him. And the same applies to all of us. All those things that we've created, all those beautiful moments are there to be shared, are there to be shared and looked back on. And don't look at judgment, never judge yourself for what you might have done wrong because that doesn't help you at all. It's just when you go into those moments, you think like, okay, maybe I could have done things differently and I won't do that again. That's a little bit different. It's like that's what we call learning from those experiences and taking you into that present moment and not looking at life with regret, but with a sense of accomplishment, a sense of achievement as we look back. And think as well, if you look at the structure of a book, you have like words and sentences and almost see them as segments of your day. Like those could be hours, seconds, minutes are in those little sentences, all alluding together. Then, of course, we have a paragraph, which could be a day, can't it? So, a rambling paragraph in a book, that your book is another day of your story. And then those chapters become weeks or months. And eventually we have acts which could become the years. Just think of all those compendiums and maybe even think to yourself, I've been around a long old while, so I could think back to 1968 when I was trapped in this world. It's almost like a booklet from 68 to 69. That was my first year and my first adventures. Not that I can remember much from back then. In fact, I can't remember a damn thing. But it's how we could, like, look at our lives, and you could even put like a segment, couldn't you, from the 60s to the 70s, 70s to the 80s, 80s to the 90s, all those little denouements of how we got to where we are today. And it's like seeing that unfolding, and understanding that that person who was back in the 60s is so different from the one who's sitting here right now. And this is what I want you to think about with those books, with that kind of look at what you've made. I remember for those in England, I think in America as well, there was a guy called David Andrews used to do this thing called This Is Your Life, a big red book. I have a big red book over there. It's just a huge dictionary. But it's like, and reading back and kind of like, it used to be quite a good program, didn't it? Where you'd see like how their life evolved and all the changes they've made, all the people that have come into it. And that's another thing as we look through that, think of the characters that come into your life. And just like in the novel or the book, some of those characters are quite, they aim to serve you, improve your lot. And then you get the villains. Who are the villains in your story? Maybe you've been the villain at some point to somebody else. And it's just recognizing where you sit with that and being cool with it, because as I say, we're a different animal to who we was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Some of the things we might have done, they wouldn't dream of doing now. It's all part of our evolution, all part of our evolution and our growth and understanding and dropping into that heart and saying, what's happened in the past? It's fine, it's gone. It's who I am now that matters. And as well, remember, the book we're writing still being written. It's not over. Not saying you're going to expire tomorrow. It's all about the kind of like things we can still create, we can still bring forward each day. I don't care if you're 15 or 95. Every day that comes forward is a new chance for you to write another line, another segment of your story, another part of your legacy, which will endure. Because then, of course, we come to the final part. Write 2 words that end. Everything has a completion. Of course, our lives will end. That's natural. The universe will end one day. It'll be billions and billions and billions of years' time, but everything will eventually come to an end. And it's like us, at some point, we will come to a time where we write those final words, completion, it's done. And But I don't want this to be necessarily about death. Not at all. As natural as that will come to all of us. Every day there are cycles being run. As I was speaking about just having your breakfast this morning, going to work, finishing. They are all, in their own way, have a start and a completion. And lives are no different to that. They are parts of a start and a completion. And we could really kind of like micro-analyze right down to the nitty-gritty of the most simple of things. Just like this video, there's a start, the middle of it, which what we're coming to now, is the story being told, and the end, which we are approaching the end of this. And it's in the end moments we conclude, we wrap things up, don't we? A good book, the one that remembers, always has a brilliant start, it's a good story, and a great ending. So when we go to our days and everything else, bring it to a great end, shall we? When the end of your day comes, I like to just break it down into days. How could you end with a flourish? Do something good, do something that makes you feel great. To say, hey, you know what? Let's imagine if you're a fitness freak, for example, you kind of like got used to doing 50 odd press ups, but today you're going to push it to 60, and you get to the 60, you say, yeah, I did this. It's like simple things like that. Maybe if you love writing, just write another poem at the end of the day, just something, a little kind of way to finish on a flourish. And it's just little touches that we can bring a little bit of zing into our lives. Isn't that great that we could do that? We can have the ability to bring those endings. And as we look back on your story, say that's another way of looking at things. And remember, the ending could be the end of that book, that chapter of your life, or that section. We write another book. There's something else for you to think about. So this book's done. Time for a new one. So the story always continues as like even with our lives as we expire, we eventually will come back into a new life. I know I'm sort of like going into the weird and wonderful a little bit here, but we have past lives, we have this life, we have future lives that eventually we're going to tumble into and explore those avenues. And again, that's just another book being written. You're just another seed of life being planted and growing and unfolding. And that's what life is about, isn't it? It is about that unfolding nature of who we truly are and recognizing all those cycles and coming to get together. But let's have a think about this. So imagine, just like when you see, let's have a think like there's a film, isn't it? Overboard. You've probably seen it with, God, blah, I can't think of his name. Kurt Russell, isn't it? Is it Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn? Is that right? I think they're the two that, or Meg Ryan. Meg Ryan, that's the one. I think she's in it. That was the original one. And then lo and behold, you start browsing and you see Overboard again. Hold on, written in 2023 or 2024. Hold on, that was like back in the 80s. And then you read it, hold on, it's been rewritten, it's been remade. You could do the same thing with your books, the things that you've done before. How so, I hear you ask? What are you talking about, Gary? Imagine it's an old holiday that you went to. Say you went abroad one time and you really enjoyed it. But when you went there, it was just so many tourists, it was too hot, it was so noisy, it was maybe a bit polluted because of the time of year when so many travellers. Well, why not rerun it? Why not rerun it in, say, 5 years' time? And you think, I'm going to go back to where I had that adventure, but this time I'm going to go a little bit off season, where maybe it's not quite so hot, it's comfortable. And because it's hot off season, it's a bit quieter, it's a little bit more pleasant. And I'm in a nice place. This is enjoyable. I can now take in all that beautiful energy that I've missed before. That is how we can rerun those stories. So even when we get to the end, we can always review. It's like the editor will tell anyone that's written a novel will tell you, writing the first draft, the book, is the easy bit. That's the simple part. The hard work starts when you start editing, when you start chopping out segments and making like almost like what's this big suddenly becomes this big. And you could do that with your books as well, or your lives. Think of it as a highlight reel. Look at the highlights if you want to, rather than going through each and every little segment. What are the highlights of your life? Go back and think about that. Okay, and I do believe we are at the end. I'd like to offer my thanks and gratitude to all those who stay to the end. And if you like what you see, if you want to subscribe, there'll be more to come. There'll be plenty more to come as I continue on this deep dive. I may not be one of the spiritual giants out there like Joe Dispenza, or I call him Joe Dispenza, or Eckhart Tolle, far from it. I'm just humble little me, putting my own take on things. And that's why I'd love to hear your words too. What's your meaning? Because you'll have your own wisdom to share. And believe you me, it all has its place. It's all relevant. And to those lovely subscribers who have subscribed, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I've got to 50 subscribers, which to me is, it's a beautiful moment. But let's push on. How far can I push this? Maybe I'll make 52. Maybe I'll make 50,002 or beyond. Who knows? But the main thing is that I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And I just want to share you much love. Till next I speak, in probably a couple of days' time. Much love. Take care.